So let me begin by telling you something about tonight's program. And that is, in 1964, in Oracle, Arizona, I was born. Now, I know that's not why you came, but that is a true story. That is a true story. Now, 23 years later, in 1987, construction began on Biosphere II. Some amazing people came together, and under the wonderful inspiration of John Allan and others, the leadership thereof, this dream of creating something that was a closed system that you'll learn more about more than I can explain or attempt to explain. But now I want you to imagine for a moment, in the first iteration, you are put in a room, so to speak, a big room, mind you, with 7 of your closest or non-closest friends for 2 years. Most of us can't even handle our own spouses for that long. Well, you're going to hear a lot about that tonight. What worked, what didn't, and some of the lessons learned. And at the end of this program, my hope is you look at our world perhaps a little differently. We're committed here at the university to moving our institution to carbon neutral, and perhaps even carbon negative. Because what's happening with Biosphere 1 is not very good in my mind. And I've always said I don't care which side of the aisle you happen to be sitting on, whether it's the right, the left, or the middle, that our globe is suffering. And it's up to us to figure out before it's too late. Because I'll guarantee you, your great-great-grandchildren will figure out whether it's too late. So tonight, I want you to enjoy the topic, ask plenty of questions, expand your curiosity. And with that, I'd like to introduce a person, and there are 2 people in this room, and I want to make sure we don't get confused. The lady in the yellow there, her name is Deborah Snyder. Hers is spelled with an I. But I want to introduce to you now Deborah Parrish Snyder with a Y.
It's really a wonderful opportunity for me to be here. It's something I've wanted to share, the lessons that I've learned from these life experiences, and start to communicate what my understanding has evolved about the biosphere. I've also found out over the last several years of asking, there are still a lot of people who do not know what a biosphere is. And I find that disturbing. So I'm here to tell you what a biosphere is. A lot of you might think that it's a building in Arizona that Joe was talking about. And he alluded to the first biosphere, this biosphere of planet Earth. I want to tell you a little bit about what I came to learn about what a biosphere is. I want to also tell you about the Ethnosphere, which has emerged on the biosphere. I'll talk about the idea of a technosphere. These are all different ideas that, if we pay attention to them, we can see them. I'd like to also introduce the Anthropocene epoch today. For those of you who haven't been following the slow movements of geological history, we now live in the Anthropocene epoch, and I'll explain why. So, in Oracle, Arizona, unbelievable things have happened. Joe Shepard was born. And Biosphere II emerged, the first model of the Earth's biosphere. And the person who was a visionary behind that project is none other than John Pope Allan, sitting in the front row. And I would like his talk. And so I'm going to allow for the first moments of this talk his voice and some incredibly high-resolution images that have been put together into a rotating image of the Earth from space to tell us what a biosphere is. Sorry, I'm going to do that one more time.
Earth is an extraordinary planet. A biosphere made its trillion-tonned, 50 million species, 4 billion-year home here. It deposited a quadrillion tons of synthesized molecules to improve that home, and it adds 10 million more tons of new geological deposits each year, thus greatly altering Earth's crust by creating rock-destroying roots and hooves, soils, mucks, sedimentary formations like coal and limestone, and liquid oils and natural gases, finally by evolving humans who evolve shore-changing and mountain-leveling technologies. Ordinarily, planets don't have biospheres. This biosphere, unique in our solar system, and from much farther beyond, allowed and assisted us to evolve and to create what I now call the ethnosphere, the sphere of cultures that manifest differing aspects of human potential. The biosphere not only grew and evolved, but humanity evolved and developed these varying, interacting cultures. I designed Biosphere II to sustain a 100-year human experiment in order to see how humans deal with relatively long-term life systems, and from that data to lay the basis for genuine noosphere. My intentions to create a decisive beginning of biospheric science and engineering, and to create a living, evolving biosphere. My aim, my hope, for Biosphere II to become more than a set of operational algorithms, a transforming experience for those involved, for it to become a symbol, metaphor, legomenon, an inspiration to assist cultures, including those that would arise on moons and other planets, and those existing now and in the future of planet Earth. For biospheres and cultures to become cooperating partners to help manifest ever finer tuned, more delightful complexities and beauties. At the conference initiating the Biosphere II project, astronaut Rusty Schweiker recalled his spacewalk during the Apollo 9 flight when he looked on the Earth miles below. On that small blue and white planet below is everything that means anything to you. All of history and music, poetry and art, death and birth, love, tears, joy, games, all on that little spot in the cosmos. National boundaries and human artifacts no longer seem real. Only the biosphere, whole and home of life. My full dream, Earth's biosphere will flourish with humanity as its star performer. The technosphere will support the biosphere as its fragile, unique base from which to intellectually and physically explore the universe. The ethnosphere's cultures will unite to stop destruction of magnificent age-old biospheric systems for evanescent exploiters to squander on conspicuously idiotic consumption. Above all, I want present-day and future humans to know that Biosphere II existed, worked, and was loved by me, my friends, colleagues, and those millions of people who came into contact with it. Humans have the power to create new biospheres, as well as to restore what has been ruthlessly plundered in Biosphere I. Biosphere II taught us much about how to build even better biospheres. As Goethe said, our friends show us what we can accomplish. Our enemies show us what we must do. I will continue to watch and participate in the ongoing history of Biosphere II and its successes. Let this history enlighten whoever it may.
I'm going to go back to this one. What happened to my text? There it is. row and his wonderful work of decades that has led me to a lifetime of adventures, unparalleled. I really am one of the luckiest people. I started in Illinois, corn and bean belt on my grandfather's knee, driving tractors. So I started early with a love for the planet and for farming. And I bought a one-way ticket to France after I graduated from college. And I was also very lucky to land at this place in southern France. A conference center, small organic farm, perfect. I learned about life. I spent 2 years living in France, and lo and behold, did I find out after a few months that this was the Institute of Ecotechnics Conference Center, and they were about to all arrive and have a conference on the galaxy. For decades, we had conferences, interdisciplinary conferences on different subjects like the jungle, the oceans, planet Earth. This was on the Mediterranean back in 2011, but the gatherings were always 60 to 70 people, interdisciplinary speakers from many different fields and backgrounds. That's me. Oops. That's me. And our friends around the planet, as we call them. And our chairman of the Institute of Ecotechnics, I'll mention a few times along here, over the past, and this is our chairman of the Institute of Ecotechnics, Mark Nelson, back in 1980 at the Planet Earth Conference, which was one of those landmark conferences where we had, that's Paul Rothmiel, the founder of MedSan, with Doctors Without Borders, and very involved in also epidemic eradication. William Burroughs, of course, gave his talk on the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse at that particular conference. This is a conference held in 1979 on the jungle in Penang, Indonesia, which I'll mention a little later was very important because the things that happened at those conferences always led to some kind of a project that would emerge afterwards. So I arrived when Buckminster Fuller was speaking, and this was I don't know how many people know Buckminster Fuller, but he is a well-versed crowd. But he developed something called synergetics, and he developed the Dymaxion map. He developed integrity, the concepts of the geodesic dome, all of that kind of vast burst of creativity that happened while he was alive. Some say he was 100 years ahead of his time. So I mentioned synergy because it's a word that we use a lot in our particular group. The result is greater than the sum of all of its individual parts. And this concept is something that the Institute of Ecotechnics really went with, I would say, in almost every project that was built. And the Institute, I'm going to go back a little bit in history because I ran into them in the early 80s, but they started a long time before that in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And in 1969, this group of people, John and a few others from California, came out west to find some property and land, the economics of owning land and building on the land, investing sweat equity and capital into a project. This was what the ranch looked like, Synergia Ranch. Synergia, it was named, which means working together. And in a few years, let's see, a few decades later, that's exactly the same view that we saw with the one bare tree, and that is the building that you saw in the distance. So from 1969 to 2020, Ecotechnics basically applied an approach to regenerate that land and to increase the biodiversity, plant trees, over 800 trees were planted, and to build enterprises. So for decades, the ranch, and it's still ongoing, and I live there now, has been innovating and gestating and creating new projects. We have a farm and a small conference center, and then this is an orchard. So the ranch, Synergia Ranch, is basically our headquarters, and the 400 fruit tree orchard was planted by none other than Greg Dugan. I'm going to mention him now because he's sitting in the front row of this audience, and he's a resident of Silver Hills, of Silver City. And for years, we've been working and pruning these trees, grafting these trees, and we learned a lot of things by doing. And the results are that we have the best tasting fruit of peaches in New Mexico. That's my opinion, but others share it. And we have lots of volunteers that come through. We have an organic farm enterprise ongoing, and that particular enterprise I'll mention at the end of this talk is starting to really flourish. But from there, they were in the desert, a desertified grassland up there in Santa Fe, and that was not going to keep Johnny busy enough. So in 1974 or so, Buckminster Fuller's book, Operating Manual for Spaceship Earth, was pointing out the fact that, we live on planet water, and gee, we're going to study the biosphere, and how can we study the biosphere if it's 70% water and we don't have a ship? So what's going to stop them from building a ship? Nothing. They just up and went out to the California, Fifth Avenue Marina, found a few feet that were not being used by anybody, nobody claimed, up and set up scaffolding. In 9 months, they built the Heraclitus, which is an 82-foot ferro-cement Chinese junk design that has been sailing around planet ocean over 270,000 miles, and I'll get to what it's doing now, but this is a life of adventure at sea. So the Institute started to cast itself out into the various different biomes of our biosphere, biomes being the building blocks of the biosphere, if you will. So the Heraclitus has done a number of travels, and it's went for 2 years to the Amazon, did ethnobotanical expeditions. It mapped and monitored coral reefs in the Southeast Asia and the Indian Ocean as part of the work that was connected with Biosphere II, and has gone to Antarctica, and we're rebuilding right now. We will go back out again. It's been doing cultural oral history all along the way, and there's so much coming out of that project. I'm going quickly through them, and I'll give you, I promise, links to where you can find out more about some of these things I'll talk to you about. The next project was, and lucky me, the savanna biome, a bona fide savanna grassland in northwest Kimberley of Australia, that the Institute of Ecotechnics was going to demonstrate pastoral regeneration. Now, Silke Snyder, who's also here, spent time in Australia at one of our other projects in the Outback, and we had a horse breeding program as well. But this is a 5,000-acre property that was a freehold property, very, very unusual. It was annexed off of a large, most of the stations are 1 million acres. We were called a postage stamp station. They didn't really disagree with they called us a hobby farm in town, which I found very annoying. But 5,000 acres still, So this is Jack. Where's Jack? Okay, so you talk about invasive species. So that is the wall of wattle. That is an invasive acacia scrub tree. All of that is miles and miles, thousands of wattle, a scrub tree that's been invading this area of eroded grassland. So the demonstration was really clearing this invasive scrub tree, planting it in improved pastures, learning how to chain down invasive, nasty wattle trees. I got to drive those tractors. I got to drive the bulldozer too before I left there. So we did a lot of land clearing by machines and a lot of land clearing by hand. So that's the Ecotechnics way. This got us called completely crazy Americans by everybody in town. So I could not get a single Australian to help me chop out a wattle tree, and I tried to pay them. I didn't. So this is actually a friend from Frankfurt, Germany. He sent his daughter down there. We had many daughters that needed discipline, sons that needed discipline. Many, they were obviously frustrated, so they would just send them out where they could get some practical experience to the Heraclitus, put them out to sea. They'd come back 9 months later, and they'd be completely cured. This station project, I spent 30 years going to the Outback every year to work on this project, And it really gave me a huge understanding about how persistence, if you can persist to resist against the wattle trees for 30 to 40 years, you will win and plant those improved pastures. And so sometimes it just takes tenacity. The horses here, we started, the grasses grew, the horses came, the Kimberley School of Horsemanship was started. I left there, I initially went there for a 9-month training program in 1983, and by the time we left that project, and I just recently sold that project to a developer who's doing large-scale application of this kind of technique throughout the Kimberleys, I was the chairman of the company running it. So you can work yourself up from the bottom if you stay. I want to leave the plants behind, leave that biome behind. There were a few other biomic projects that the Agrotechnics group had been working with, rainforests, and I'll get to that a little bit later, but basically the culmination of these different biomic projects, experiences working in rainforest, savanna, ocean, desert, led John and others to feel that they now could really learn something by building a model of the Earth's biosphere and working with the idea that biomes are the building blocks. So this particular diagram gives you just a quick overview of the biomes that were inside Biosphere II, and we called this the wilderness biomes, the rainforest. This was a savanna. These are artificial rock cliffs that were built. Ocean coral reef, 1,000,000-acre artificial coral reef, the largest living artificial coral reef system ever built. Marshes, desert, and these, that was connected with a bridge here. These connect to what we call the anthropogenic biomes. The city biome, it's a biome, but it's made by man, humans. And agricultural biome, also something that you don't find in nature. So, but it was an important part of the model because we couldn't build a model of Biosphere I without including them. So it took about 8 years. 1984, the project started with the first conference, and then it went to, by 1991, the Biosphere II was built, and we began the first human enclosure experiments. So just because a picture says 1,000 words and also a video says even more, this is a 1-minute view of Biosphere II.
I take my last breaths of this
Film
atmosphere for 2
called
years.
Spaceship Earth, which came out last year.
We were pioneers. We were the first biospherians.
How can you prepare yourself for the journey into the unknown?
A biosphere is a closed system with plants and animals and the atmospheres all inside. We called it Biosphere II because Biosphere I is the Earth.
If we're going to go to Mars and the Moon, we better know how to make a biosphere.
Climate change is a threat. We were trying to counteract that threat.
We put in a rainforest, a desert, and a living coral reef.
It was a global curiosity. Made people separated from life.
It was science fiction without the fiction.
I'm wondering how long they can last in their darkening slippers.
The oxygen was really getting low. We were suffocating and starving.
We had to make some pretty hard decisions.
To live in a small world changes who you are.
Suddenly rethinking what's possible on Earth.
This is an incredible moment. The future is here. Okay, that's, for those of you who want to go dive deeper into any of this, it's on Amazon and Hulu. And voila, so there it is, standing in the middle of the desert, just 10 miles south of Oracle. And you can see the design now that I just showed you, the wilderness biomes over here. It's pretty low res, sorry about that. Habitat is here, and the intensive agriculture. These where you saw these little round tunnels in that film just now. These are underground tunnels that connect to what's called the lung. That's a variable expansion units. They have a rubber membrane that was, all the air inside was completely sealed. There was, it was the most tightly sealed structure ever built. It was 2,000 times more tightly sealed than the space shuttle, I think it was compared to. There had never been a facility built so tightly. And the reason that we could discover the atmospheric monitoring that was done, we could measure in parts per billion inside there. And I'll tell you a little bit about the discoveries. But I will say that the people, because it's all about people, this was 14 Biosphere candidates that we had to choose from to go inside to live for 2 years. And I want to point out this one right here. That's Silke Snyder, was sitting in the front row. And she came back from Australia too, where she was working with Diana, breeding horses, and came to and became very much involved in the domestic animal selection of the animals that were going to go inside, the insectary. In fact, I think that these are her hands here holding these ladybugs. This is the human habitat, just a glimpse, and then we had silky chickens, right? Are those silky chickens? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And jungle fowl, pygmy goats. Everything had to be able to survive off of what was inside that system because there was no way. So, closed system science started in Russia, actually, with the Russian scientists, starting by Vladimir Natsuki, that's the guy in the middle, who wrote the first theory of the biosphere, which Biosphere II was a test of. So he wrote from 1929, he wrote the first theory of the biosphere. He was Ukrainian born. He founded 5 major research and study institutions in the Soviet Union at the time. He was venerated in the East as we venerate Darwin in the West. There was closed system work being done in Krasnoyarsk, in Siberia, down here in a facility called Biosphere III, and they had decades of experience already to share with John, who came there and befriended them all, and invited them to come to Biosphere II and help us to design how to survive and what to expect, because Yevgeny Shepelev was the first man to be in a closed system in the 50s, and all he had was chlorella to live on for 24 hours. So this is the test module that we built to test the technology and everything that was going to go into the design of Biosphere II. And John Allan was the first guinea pig. How's my sound out there? I feel as though I'm going in and out. So there he is, inside test module, back in 1990, I would say. And there's a miniature, this is a miniature lung. This was designed for one person. And he didn't die after 24 hours. John came out. We were absolutely terrified when he went in there. I was on the outside. I'm like, oh my God, I couldn't sleep at all that night. We monitored him 24/7. Nobody knew what was going to happen inside this tightly sealed system. There was no way for any of the air to go out. But there were all these plants inside. So, and John did have total confidence. He had total confidence that it was all going to work. So that's why we put him in there first. These are some of our Russian colleagues here. This is me. I was in charge of documentation and publications and educational programs. And I was 25 or 26. This is Yevgeny Shepelev, the first man to live inside of a closed system. And this is Oleg Gazenko, Dr. Oleg Gazenko. He was in charge of all of the medical care and treatment for the entire cosmonauts. So he lived in Moscow. And then this is Joseph Gittleson, who was the man that was leading Biosphere experiments in Krasnoyarsk. So, and there's Mark Nelson, our chairman, John Allan. This was before closure here. Mark Nelson, our chairman, went inside Biosphere II. So here is a meeting with Oleg during the 2-year experiment. They came to visit regularly, Johnny, and there was, I don't have a picture, but the Biosphere handshake was the 2 hands plastered against between the glass. So that was called the Biosphere handshake. After Biosphere II was finished, the first 2-year experiment, we presented the findings at the Linnaean Society in London. Anna Maleshka here, who worked closely with Yevgeny Shepelev, very, very brilliant scientist. This is Claire Folsom, who was the American scientist that designed the ecospheres, and he was a very famous microbiologist. And voila, here we are at the Linnaean Society. And this was actually at Les Marronniers in 2016. One of the last conferences that we had here with Oleg Gazenko, who again came to visit us, and precious, he passed away a few years ago. I'm not going to show any more of these charts, except for 2, but I'm just going to give you a quick idea. When I talk about what is a biosphere, you have to look at these different levels in order to be able to, well, these are the levels that have been designed, that went into Biosphere II design, and so we would propose that they could be how you would look at designing any kind of ecosystem, bioregional, all the way to the biosphere, your biomes, bioregions. We have a lot of people that work in bioregional development and bioregional design. It's really important, it's very helpful. You go past the state lines and things like that. What I want to do is I want people to see whole biomes and whole biospheres. And some of the things that were unique about Biosphere II was that in those days, engineers didn't understand what ecologists had to say, and ecologists didn't understand what engineers had to say. So they had to develop a whole ability, like one word would mean 2 different things in the 2 different fields. So for the first year, there was a lot of hair pulling, shouting, and door slamming. People would leave. This is too much. We can't. But finally, after about 2 years, I think it got in, I remember the engineers were talking to the ecologists saying, oh, so I need to make the fan airflow be less harsh so that I don't destroy the vines that are coming down off of the Savannah Cliff, for example. So they were designing, starting very early on, the technosphere to support the biosphere. Instead of the way that a lot of our technosphere is designed is just basically, here's our technosphere, we're just going to take everything we need out of nature and we are not going to give anything back. So Biosphere II was a model at how you can approach designing a technosphere, because nobody's against a technosphere, so long as it's designed to support a biosphere. This is the idea of the spheres here. And there's a bit of an overlap. John talked about the ethnosphere, and that is a term he has coined. Because the people, you had to also design the people in the system. And so people are here, but it was designing a culture inside. So we learned some things about the ethnosphere, designing systems to support small groups of people in confinement, and learned that diversity of cultures is very beneficial. We had a lot of Americans in there, and I think we had 2 Brits. And the second enclosure experiment, they had a much broader diversity of the crew, and it did lead to a different kind of vibration with the crew. And because it's something about, I think they found the same things in Antarctica and other confined remote research stations, that the more diversity you have in cultures, as well as your ecology and your biodiversity, the better. If you have to be stuck together. So there is Biosphere II at the end of, in 1990. That looks like that was Earth Day, I think. Oh no, that's closure. So it looks like it's when they were just gonna come out. So it was a beautiful, beautiful facility, still operating today by the University of Arizona, with some wonderful programs coming out that are, in my opinion, are actually starting to build on. The facility did go through a period of stress And it's been, a little bit redesigned. The agriculture and the humans are no longer living aside. It's being used more for sophisticated, large-scale greenhouse testing. But there's a couple of very important biomic studies that they've done with the rainforest, and we would like to see more biospheres built. The idea when we left there was that there would be many biospheres. Biospheres for education, biospheres for the industry to use, to test their chemicals in, closed systems, laboratory biospheres. And they are emerging, but it's still, it was a way ahead of its time. And maybe now, it's bringing lessons home that we need and none too soon, or none too late. This is where it came together for me back in 2020 in Lake Powell. It's been 25 years now or more since I left Biosphere II. I have a publishing company and I've been publishing books on biospherics in ecology and consciousness since that time. Many books that I'll actually have out here if you can browse through later. But in 2020, we had that 110-degree heat, if you remember. And, well, I guess down here you might have had that more than once. But that was the week I was going to Lake Powell for my first trip. And the water levels had also been about 50% of what they normally are. I didn't know what that meant. But when I got there, this was the view. There were fires also burning on 3 sides of the park. So when I got there, I sat by the side of this beautiful, beautiful view, and it's actually spectacular. But I began to weep because you can see this is where the water levels normally were. This is the area that was we all know is formed through man-made diversion of water and damming. And then we have this spectacular place where all these people can have recreational time and a really wonderful experience in the wild. But the water came down from here. So all of this stuff had been underwater for the longest time. And I just sat on this rock where I took this picture from, and I wept. And why did I weep? I was looking for what I needed to do, and what I needed to do came instantly, and it was like, people don't understand what a biosphere is and the Anthropocene, so I must start to build these educational programs. And I was telling everybody on the houseboat all my epiphanies and revelations, and we were going and walking around and enjoying all of this successional ecology that's in all these areas where it was covered by water. And it was bizarre. There were traces of the Anthropocene, old boats that had fallen, sunk down to the bottom where the Parrish designer sunglasses pulled up out of the weeds and still looking good. And me and my gang, went around and we went all around and I kept saying, my God, there's another kind of tumbleweed. And I just was amazed with all of the successional ecology. And I got dubbed as the one that was most likely to discover a new species of tumbleweed. So I left there full of just renewed urgency because I was quite shocked with the activities of people, both pulling out their boats. You see people, their boats were hanging off there because the waters had gone down, and it was a disaster. I said, what is this? What can we do about it? The idea that we're in the Anthropocene is a grounding force for me, because I am not happy that we have a layer of plastic in the fossil record. That they can identify that this era of geological history in the fossil record, and that is how geologists determine what era we're living in. Oh, it's a little bit hard to read in big like this. So here we are. This has now been decided by the Geological Commission that we officially live in this Anthropocene era. Some people that still don't want to go there, but 1950 is the date that they have found the marker in the geological record, and it basically goes back to the Industrial Revolution. in terms of the start, but you know, they're looking at atomic explosion, nuclear blasts and testings and things like that, and those kinds of materials will filter down to your fossil record. So, knowing that, what on earth can we do now? Well, I decided when I left Lake Powell, I got to keep doing everything that I am doing, but faster. So, that's me. But my colleagues have already been out there and continue to get out there doing it. So in New Mexico, the ranch is working on a whole soil regeneration program on the 130-acre property to really rebuild, to inoculate, to get organic matter going back in there again on those lands. If you remember that barren, hard clay soil that they got there early on, and the young lady on the right here is John's daughter, Starlight Augustine, with a double PhD. They come in smart. They're coming smart now. The other things that we're doing is that the Heraclitus has been, you know, put to the test. So after 270,000 miles, we have to take it out of the water. It's in northern Spain and it's being rebuilt right now. You see on the right the hull of the ship, the wire mesh, the concrete, a new layer of concrete ferrous cement has been poured over the hull now, and the hull is now back, and the ship's hull is intact after 9 years of waiting. We had to wait for 2 years because COVID shut down the construction crew 2 weeks before they were finished with the hull. So that was painful. But it will be rebuilt in about another year and a half. It'll be back in the water, and then we'll be continuing to have young people come on, young and old, there's no age limit, to sail on more adventures on planet ocean. And one of the other themes of the Heraclitus is living at sea, the idea of sea people, which is an ancient idea, but the whole culture of people that live at sea, and that's where their life is. They live in that, that's their biome. So we have a sustainable forestry project in Puerto Rico, 900 acres. It had the Eye of Maria, went right over the homestead area, so we've been rebuilding that for a while. But it looks like the tree, there's a plantation of 40,000 blue maho and teak and other cash crops planted in this is John's idea, working with some other forestry people to do the technique of line planting. So instead of clear cutting the forest, like most timber projects are, and planting, that we would just have these 3-meter swaths. Dugan spent a lot of time there, Greg Dugan, also with the trees, he's a real tree man, planting these trees in a line, and then we just have to keep the vines off of them for the first few years until they can get up to the light. But essentially the plantation of the trees are in there, but you can't hardly see them because it's all forest. So this is an award-winning sustainable forestry project. Wastewater treatment systems, wastewater gardens is another area that we took from Biosphere II because they had to recycle all of their sewage and all of the stuff from the laboratory and everything. There was no way. So Mark Nelson, our chairman, developed wastewater treatment systems, ecological, 100% ecological wastewater treatment systems. This is in Algeria. This is a wastewater treatment. This is a subsurface flow bed that uses plants. The sewage is underneath, flowing underneath. It's there's gravel, there's no exposed water, and this takes care of the sewage for an entire tekia that was being rebuilt in the north of Algeria. This is in Bali. This is the Sunrise School in Bali. So basically this replaces the leach drain. If you have it protects your water tables, and if you're in a remote area and you need to remove the last, it gets rid of 98% of all the fecal coliform and everything. If you want to get it 100%, you put a little, you can sterilize the rest of the way. You can definitely water your gardens and anything else with these wastewater gardens. And Mark Nelson went on to write a book called The Wastewater Gardener, which Synergetic Press published, and that is now being applied in the southern town near Basra in Iraq, in the Mesopotamian marshes. We're building a 6-acre reed wastewater treatment system for a town of 7,000 people. We were just there last week not we, myself, but Mary Del Rubenstein, who's an artist, that developed this concept with Mark. So they can be applied to different scales, these technologies. So we continue to put these things back into the Earth's biosphere. Biosphere II was designed to show us ways for both space exploration and for Earth applications, because to be a self-contained environment, to live where you have to recycle everything, what we learned from that experience has direct application back to our planet Earth. So, but at the same time, it also, you know, the adventure of space exploration, at that time, we had a very active space program, and that was really the twofold mission of that project. I want to say, in summary here, that what John said so eloquently at the beginning of this is lives deep in me, and you can read these notes here. I hope that I have been able to plant the seeds of an idea about spheres that we can pay attention to. What happened to me when I published in 1984 the Biosphere Catalog. That was my first book that I published. It was my second book that I published. But I was the editor of, and I had to learn what a biosphere was because I had been given a contract by Space Biospheres Ventures to publish it. So I began to explore, and we've got the biomes, we've got plants, we've got animals, there's microbes, there's genetics, there's all these different disciplines of study that go into the approach of a study of the biosphere. And so I began to amass them into this early biosphere catalog that was like a takeoff on the whole Earth catalog. And I just never looked at the world again the same. As soon as I got that table of contents in my mind, when I fly on the airplane, I'm not looking at the clouds and the air out there, it's the atmosphere. And there's hydrosphere in there, and I see these spheres and layers, and I feel these spheres, and I want to convey that, you know, we can embody some of these ideas because we are nature. We're not separate from nature. We're not. It's not man in the biosphere. It's, you know, we've had that typically, you know, this conquering nature, Anglo-Saxon patriarchal perspective. Perhaps something that has to kind of fade away as we start to get into more social justice, environmental justice concerns, and start to look and examine our approaches to the world that we live in, and find a more equitable way for both nature, both the biodiversity around us, and our own existence in that space. Our indigenous elders, the people whose shoulders we stand on, they understand very well. We need to listen, we need to learn by doing, and I encourage people to explore the biosphere. And if you're a project-oriented person, come and visit some of our projects and learn more. An expression that we have in ecotechnics that I hold dear to my heart is to dare to dream. It's what sets us in motion. And once we're in motion, let's dream no small dreams. So I hope I've shared a little bit of my love of the biosphere and these ideas to give you all a visualization of what these spheres, how they exist and how they interact, and